Okay, let's read another edition of the Rambler. This is number 33 for Tuesday, July 10th, 1750. Of course, by Dr. Samuel Johnson. The title is An Allegorical History of Rest and Labor. It begins with a Latin quote, Quod caret alterna requie durabile non est, by Ovid. And then I think this is a translation. Alternate rest and labor long endure. I think I can read that better. Alternate rest and labor long endure. That's better. Sometimes you have to take a second run at it. Here we go. In the early ages of the world, as is well known to those who are versed in ancient traditions, when innocence was yet untainted and simplicity unadulterated, mankind was happy in the enjoyment of continual pleasure and constant plenty, under the protection of rest. It's capital R on the rest, so personified in some way. A gentle divinity who required of her worshippers neither altars nor sacrifices, and whose rites were only performed by prostrations upon tufts of flowers in shades of jasmine and myrtle, or by dances on the banks of rivers flowing with milk and nectar. Under this easy government, the first generations breathed the fragrance of perpetual spring, ate the fruits which, without culture, fell ripe into their hands, and slept under bowers arched by nature, with the birds singing over their heads and the beasts sporting about them. But by degrees they began to lose their original integrity. Each, though there was more than enough for all, was desirous of approaching part to himself. Was desirous of approaching part to himself. Wait, hold on, what? Let me read that sentence again. I got it wrong. Sometimes Dr. Johnson's structures, they're unfamiliar to me. But by degrees they began to lose their original integrity. But by degrees they began to lose their original integrity. Each, though there was more than enough for all, was desirous of approaching part to himself. Oh, appropriating. I got the word wrong. Now it makes sense. One more time. But by degrees they began to lose their original integrity. Each, though there was more than enough for all, was desirous of appropriating part to himself. Then entered violence and fraud, and theft and rapine. Soon after pride and envy broke into the world, and brought with them a new standard of wealth. For men, who till then thought themselves rich when they wanted nothing, now rated their demands not by the calls of nature, but by the plenty of others, and began to consider themselves as poor when they beheld their own possessions exceeded by those of their neighbors. Now, only one could be happy, because only one could have most, and that one was always in danger, lest the same arts by which he had supplanted others should be practiced upon himself. Amidst the prevalence of this corruption, the state of the earth was changed. The earth was divided into seasons. Part of the ground became barren, and the rest yielded only berries, acorns, and herbs. The summer and autumn, indeed, furnished a coarse and inelegant sufficiency, but winter was without any relief. Famine, capital F, with 1,000 diseases, which the inclemency of the air invited into the upper regions. Remember, this was a time when they believed that the diseases were caused by stale or bad air, right? Made havoc among men, and then appeared to be danger, lest they should be destroyed before they were reformed. To oppose the devastations of famine, who scattered the ground everywhere with carcasses, labor came down upon earth. Labor was the son of necessity, so capital L labor, capital N necessity. The nursling of hope, capital H hope, and the pupil of art, capital A art. I feel like I'm doing this unnecessarily now. He had the strength of his mother, the spirit of his nurse, and the dexterity of his governess. His face was wrinkled with the wind and swarthy with the sun. He had the implements of husbandry in one hand, with which he turned up the earth. In the other he had the tools of architecture, and raised walls and towers at his pleasure. He called out with a rough voice, and here it's quoted, "Mortals, see here the power to whom you are consigned, and from whom you are to hope for all your pleasures and all your safety. You have long languished under the dominion of rest, an impotent and deceitful goddess, who can neither protect nor relieve you, but resigns you to the first attacks of either famine or disease, and suffers her shades to be invaded by every enemy and destroyed by every accident. Awake, therefore, to the call of labor. I will teach you to remedy the sterility of the earth and the severity of the sky. I will compel summer to find provision for the winter. I will force the waters to give you their fish, the air its fowls, and the forest its beasts. I will teach you to pierce the bowels of the earth, and bring out from the caverns of the mountains metals which shall give strength to your hands and security to your bodies, by which you may be covered from the assaults of the fiercest beasts, and with which you shall fell the oak and divide rocks, and subject all nature to your use and pleasure." Encouraged by this magnificent invitation, the inhabitants of the globe considered labor as their only friend, and hastened to his command. He led them out to the fields and mountains, and showed them how to open mines, to level hills, to drain marshes, and change the course of rivers. The face of things was immediately transformed. The land was covered with towns and villages, encompassed with fields of corn and plantations of fruit trees. And nothing was seen but heaps of grain and baskets of fruit, full tables and crowded storehouses. Thus Labor and his followers added every hour new acquisitions to their conquests, and saw Famine gradually dispossessed of his dominions, till at last, amidst their jollity and triumphs, they were depressed and amazed by the approach of Lassitude, who was known by her sunk eyes and dejected countenance. Wow. She came forward, trembling and groaning. At every groan, the hearts of all those who beheld her lost their courage, and nerves slackened. Their hands shook, and the instruments of labor fell from their grasp. Shocked with this horrid phantom, they reflected with regret on their easy compliance with the solicitations of labor, and began to wish again for the golden hours which they remembered to have passed under the reign of rest, whom they resolved again to visit, and to whom they intended to dedicate the remaining part of their lives. Rest had not left the world. They quickly found her, and to atone for their former desertion, invited her to the enjoyment of those acquisitions which labor had procured them. Rest, therefore, took leave of the groves and valleys which she had hitherto inhabited, and entered into palaces, reposed herself in alcoves, and slumbered away the winter upon beds of down, and the summer in artificial grottos with cascades playing before her. There was indeed always something wanting to complete her felicity, and she could never lull her returning fugitives to that serenity which they knew before their engagements with labor. Hold on one more time. There was indeed always something wanting to complete her felicity, and she could never lull her returning fugitives to that serenity which they knew before their engagements with labor. Nor was her dominions entirely without control, for she was obliged to share it with luxury, though she always looked upon her face as a false friend, by whom her influence was in reality destroyed, while it seemed to be promoted. The two soft associates, however, reigned for some time without visible disagreement, till at last luxury betrayed her charge, and let in disease to seize upon her worshippers. Rest then flew away and left the palace to the usurpers, who employed all their arts to fortify themselves in their possession and to strengthen the interest of each other. Rest had not always the same enemy. In some places she escaped the incursions of disease, but had her residence invaded by a more slow and subtle intruder. For very frequently, when everything was composed and quiet, when there was neither pain within nor danger without, when every flower was in bloom, and every gale freighted with perfumes, satiety would enter with a languishing and repining look, and throw herself upon the couch, placed and adorned for the accommodation of rest. No sooner was she seated than a general gloom spread itself on every side. Wow! The groves immediately lost their verdure, and the inhabitants desisted from their melody. The breeze sunk in sighs, and the flowers contracted their leaves, and shut up their odors. Nothing was seen on every side, but multitudes wandering about they knew not whither, in quest they knew not of what. No voice was heard, but the complaints that mentioned no pain, and murmurs that could tell of no misfortune. This is why Dr. Johnson is so great. Rest had now lost her authority. Her followers again began to treat her with contempt. Some of them united themselves more closely to luxury, who promised by her arts to drive satiety away, and others that were more wise or had more fortune went back to labor, by whom they were indeed protected from satiety, but delivered up in time to lassitude and forced by her to the bowers of rest. Thus rest and labor equally perceived their reign of short duration and uncertain tenure, and their empire liable to inroads from those who were alike enemies to both. They each found their subjects unfaithful, and ready to desert them upon every opportunity. Labor saw the riches which he had given always, carried away by an offering to rest, and rest found her votaries in every exigence, flying from her to beg help of labor. They therefore at last determined upon an interview, in which they agreed to divide the world between them, and govern it alternately, allotting the dominion of the day to one and the night to the other, and promised to guard the frontiers of each other, so that whenever hostilities were attempted, satiety should be intercepted by labor, and lassitude expelled by rest. Thus the ancient quarrel was appeased, and the hatred is often succeeded by its contrary. Rest afterwards became pregnant by labor, and was delivered of health, a benevolent goddess who consolidated the union of her parents, and contributed to the regular vicissitudes of their reign, by dispensing her gifts to those only who shared their lives in just proportions between rest and labor. Holy goodness. This is why Dr. Johnson is who he is. I've never read anything quite like that. An allegory, a fable of sorts, telling the story of why we live in the lives that we live, the adult, active lives of work and rest and home and family and vacation and weekends and sleep and energy. Of course, that is how the world works. But Dr. Johnson has invented a tale to explain how that could have originated, how the necessity of these each. I especially like how languor and what was the other part of it? Lassitude. Lassitude expelled by rest. There was that one bit. The frontiers of thither. Oh no. Satiety should be intercepted by labor, and lassitude expelled by rest. till you're full. You've had enough. And it's before you reach that point of, now what? Oh, it's time for another day. The alarm goes off, right? Satiety should be intercepted by labor. And lassitude expelled by rest. That feeling of having worked too much, like I'm feeling right now after yesterday. Rest kind of brings it back a little bit. Beautiful, Dr. Johnson. Thank you. That was so worthwhile to read. I'm so glad I got to share it. Thank you. Take care.